Welcome back here on FloorHSFootball.com, and this one's going to be a little bit of special presentation because we also have got SBLive here with us on this one, and we're going to have Andy Villamarzo joining us from SBLive here, and we're going to be talking and previewing this week's state championship games in Tallahassee. 2 weeks of state championships games with 4 games this week, 5 games next week. But with the focus is to 4 games this week with classes 1M on Thursday, 2S on Friday, and then 1S and 1R on Saturday. Andy, I definitely appreciate you being able to join me here to talk about the games here, because we're going to just throw out our knowledge of these teams, what we've seen this year, what we're looking at, what the expectations, because if anything, what we thought maybe the teams that were going to be in the state championship games, we kind of got a little bit of a surprise that some of the teams that we thought might make it in the preseason are not coming this year, and said we got a bit of a different breed of teams coming into the state championship games. So, first, looking back with the entire season here, the fact we're at this point now, last 2 weeks of the football season, state championships, I mean, it seems like it went by very fast. What's your opinion on that? Did it go by fast for you?
I would like to say it went by fast, but I don't think it did. It's just because of all the long drives, going around the state, just being able to hit the Panhandle, all the way down to Fort Lauderdale, seeing all the teams out throughout the state, and so much good football, so much variety when you're talking about, I mean, we can go to the classifications, metro, suburban, rural. There's all the areas just bring a different feel to the game, but obviously great talent at each level. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to meet new coaches, players stay. It was definitely for me a longer season than usual, but it was a lot of fun, and expect to have a lot of fun here at the state championships in Tallahassee and Fort Lauderdale.
No, absolutely. Of course, the season, it seems like it goes by quick every year. It seems like the first for me, it seems like we're in August, and next thing you know, it's December, and it's almost Christmas time, and here we go, our state championships. So the big thing this year is that instead of 3 state championship games in Tallahassee, there's 4 because of the expanded classifications now with metro, suburban, rural. Now there's 9 classes, not 8. So Tallahassee gained an additional state championship game. And Andy, let's talk about this here with everything. Let's start with let's talk about Class 1M, which is coming up here on Thursday night at 7 o'clock at Gene Cox Stadium, and that is going to be the matchup between Clearwater Central Catholic and Chaminade Madonna. I think, a lot of people had Chaminade Madonna pegged to be in the Class 1M state championship. I think almost everybody did. If they didn't, they might have been sleeping under a rock, I would say. But a lot of people thought Trinity Christian was going to be that team that was going to face Chaminade Madonna. Instead, it's Clearwater Central Catholic, and out of the Tampa Bay area, they're the lone representative of the Tampa Bay area in terms of just the immediate Tampa Bay area this year. So it's very interesting, when we're talking about this, that here we are. It's Clearwater Central Catholic versus Chaminade Madonna for the 1M state championship. So I mean, first, again, it's not the surprise that Chaminade Madonna is here. It's the surprise that Clearwater Central Catholic is actually here in this game. So, I mean, is this a surprise to you that they're here at this point?
I would say it is if I didn't know how Coach Chris Harvey, who I know you did he's done such a great job with the Marauders. And when I spoke to him at the very beginning of the season, I went to practice for probably a hot 10 minutes before rain and lightning came in and ended the practice a little early. And talking to Coach Harvey at that practice in between the lightning delay that was going on, I was asking him questions in regards to what he thought this Marauders team would be able to do. And he went right to Pinellas County doesn't have a champion. And he's adamant that they are going to be the first state champion. Now, is it going to happen against this very Chaminade Madonna group? You'd be hell-bent to have me say that's going to happen, because this is a very talented Lions team. But surprised that Clearwater Central Catholic is at this point? I don't think you can be, because you look at their schedule and the wins. Their only loss is the Trinity Catholic, who is also in a state championship. The Marauders, I mean, they are battle tested. The win over against University Christian last Friday, I mean, if you want to talk about facing adversity and winning in the final seconds, they were able to pull it off. Jershawn Newton throwing a touchdown pass to Boston College commit Nate Johnson. I believe it was 30 seconds left in the game. That's clutch. Overcoming adversity. I think this group is as prepared as they can be. Last year, obviously, Berkeley Prep was in this position as the Tampa Bay area team facing Chaminade Madonna. I think the difference, Josh, with Clearwater Central Catholic going up on Madonna is you're going to see a little bit more balance on the offensive side. I believe Jershawn Newton, their sophomore quarterback, presents an aerial attack that Berkeley Prep just couldn't go vertical through the air. They were more of a ground team with their running backs. So I think the Marauders, if they can pose any problems to the Lions, which they haven't faced many, it would be they have more balance on offense. But to go back to the initial question, I'm going to say no. I think CCC expected to be at this point, and I'm not fully surprised because they're battle-tested.
No, absolutely, and the battle tested indeed. And of course, you mentioned that loss to Trinity Catholic as being their only loss in on the slate this year. And of course, Trinity Catholic's playing in the 1S State Championship game, which we will talk about here in a few minutes. But, you know, looking at it on your screen here, you see the profiles of both teams, Clearwater Central Catholic, Chaminade Madonna. You see the road to state here, 12-1, Clearwater Central Catholic. Chaminade Madonna sitting there at 12-0. Chaminade Madonna is a very interesting team. We'll talk about that in a moment. But here, you know, last time Clearwater Central Catholic was in a state championship game was in 2013. So we're almost talking a decade ago. Clearwater Central Catholic was sitting there in a state championship game, and they lost to Trinity Christian in that game that year in the Class 3A title game. But here's Chaminade Madonna coming in, having won the 3A title last year, and of course now they're in 7 straight state championships that they have been in since going back to when Damian Jones started in 2016. Actually, both coaches, Chris Harvey and Damian Jones, started the same year coaching their respective teams. So, Andy, you know, and all of this, let's talk about, you know, the thought of all this with you know, the game with Chaminade Madonna, you know, coming in, you know, they're looking for their second straight state championship. Damian Jones, you know, I mean, this team has been a beast of a team, and especially, you know, you look at the first half of their schedule from this year. You know, it was a tough schedule, but the back half didn't, you know, it was more of a softer schedule, because, and some of that was because of their district. Their district didn't lend them really much of anything. You know, it was roll through the district and win the district title. So, but Chaminade Madonna has a case as well in this to be a national champion if they win this title on Thursday night, because they have been really aggressive this year, and it seems like as of late they're a much more well-rounded team compared to the team that beat ING Academy this year, Miami Central, who is also playing for a state championship next week. So, I mean, looking at that, what are your thoughts with Chaminade Madonna here before we talk about the stat leaders for, you know, that are coming into this game? Because there's some talent on both sides for both of these teams that we need to mention.
When I think of Chaminade Madonna, I go back to the Brown Classic that was at the beginning of the season, and they faced St. John's High School out of DC, and I just saw the ease that they were able to play with in the first 3 quarters. The fourth quarter was kind of went haywire for them, because they took their foot off the gas pedal. They allowed that St. John's team to get back into the game, and they made it. I mean, if anything else, the score definitely made it respectable, 35-28. But for those in attendance that day, they were able to see that game was, for the most part, a rout. And that's how most of the games have been for the Lions. Outside of that game with Plantation American Heritage, all the games were, I mean, some of these scores, 90-0, Josh, 63-0, 56-0, 48-0. This team just knows shutouts and blowouts. They really just have been able to run these scores up on teams and been able to really just win with ease. They are kind of the opposite of what CCC has been. They haven't had to face a lot of adversity, very little. And when they have had to face it, they've answered the bell. They've been able to play, strong offensive football all season long. And Damian Jones, One time I saw him speaking to his team afterwards. He was telling them, you got to zone out everything. You got to zone out the noise. You got to zone out kind of the social media chatter. That was something he wanted his guys to kind of be laser focused on the season, be in that moment and look at the season because, yeah, I mean, you spoke about a national championship. SBLive Sports, we put together kind of a California versus Florida mythical 1, 2, 3, and 4, if we could have such a thing, kind of national championship. And of course, you got St. John Bosco, you got Mater Dei, and then the team you aforementioned, Miami Central, and then you got Chaminade. And you put those 4 teams in there. I said St. John Bosco versus Chaminade Madonna, which I think we'd all like. But for me, I thought Chaminade. I've seen Miami Central. I've seen Chaminade. I think Chaminade Madonna just has this offense that is one of a kind. I think it could be one of the best offenses to ever come out of South Florida. It is really that good. Many will get to see it on Thursday night. I think it's a special group, and for all the good that CCC has done this year, the Lions have just been, unworldly when it comes to playing football this year, Josh.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is Andy Villamarzo joining us from SBLive Florida here with us here as we preview all the 4 state championship games this week. We'll do it again next week with the 5 state championships down at Fort Lauderdale, but the biggest focus is the 4 here playing at Gene Cox Stadium in Tallahassee this week. And, Andy, let's go through with some of the stat information because this is really what's really interesting here is that, talking with this information here is, looking at it, you mentioned about Jershawn Newton, being the, thing, and he, he's an underclassman here, 2,100 yards passing here, 23 touchdowns. But if you look at the other side of it with Chaminade Madonna, Cedric Bailey, almost 3,000 yards passing, 42 touchdowns. I mean, that's a night and day difference almost in thing. But, if you look at it, if you look at Cedric Bailey's numbers, well, we see why some of those numbers are high because if you look at the games like, hey, the 90-0 games or, the 63-0 games, especially even last week against True North where they just shut True North out. That explains why some of the numbers are high, but it doesn't. But it doesn't take away what Cedric Bailey is able to do because he was the quarterback last year for Chaminade Madonna, leading them to the state championship game. So here they are again. Cedric Bailey is leading them right into that state championship game again as at quarterback.
Yeah, 2 very strong signal callers when it comes to high school football with both teams. Jershawn Newton, he has a few Power 5 offers up against Cedric Bailey. That'll be his counterpart. And Bailey, getting to see him in person, standing next to him, and I'm 5'7", so, most people are going to be taller than me, but it's like a shooting guard playing quarterback, just looking at him. He did, and, hey, they say you miss all the shots you don't take. Well, he doesn't miss on many of those shots he takes. He throws a deep ball like none other. He's got the dudes to throw it to. Obviously, Jeremiah Smith is one of 4 stellar wide receivers they got. Josiah Trader's another one. Edwin Joseph is another. Dwayne Thomas. These guys are, and Davian Goss at running back. This offense, like I said before, it's I don't want to say one for the ages, but it really is an offense we'll remember when we're talking about this year's state championships and this just how good they were. And yeah, obviously some of those scores inflated, a lot of points, but how we weren't at the games. We don't know. Maybe they were trying to play their backups and third string guys, and they just kept scoring. But that's just how good this Lions team has been. So. And I don't want to overlook CCC. I've seen them in person. Saw them against Carrollwood Day. Lenwood Sapp, Coach Harvey will tell you he's one of the best running backs in the state. Hard runner. Obviously, the statistics speak to that. Nate Johnson, a Boston College commit. He plays both sides of the ball, so we'll see him at cornerback and wide receiver. Andy Jaff, he was a slot receiver heading into the season, but obviously playing safety as well, and that's really where he's made his mark. He's got some Power 5 offers on the table.
Absolutely.
And their offensive line. I think their offensive line has done a really good job up front. Shane Elam, Kevin Terry. These guys have really paved the way for this offense to be able to run for all those yards that Newton and Sapp have rushed for. So, if anything else, Josh, should be a lot of points on the board. Whether it's combined, both of them are scoring a ton, or it's Chaminade. It's gonna be a lot of offense.
No, absolutely. Of course, you mentioned Linwood Sapp, over 1,200 yards rushing. Davian Goss just right under 1,000, but if he plays well Thursday night, he'll go over that 1,000-yard mark for the season. But Nate Johnson III, almost 900 yards receiving this year. Of course, Jeremiah Smith, 960 yards for Chaminade, so it could be a potentially 1,000-yard receiver there for the Lions. But really, when you look at it, Zach Crowthers for Chaminade, 14 sacks this year. So I know you got that's probably the biggest worry for CCC is that if Crowthers gets in there into the backfield on them when they're on offense, that could be dangerous there for Jerjon Newton.
Yeah, their defense flies around. They have Power 5 players on that side of the ball as well. Their defense doesn't get talked a whole lot about just because of how pro offense is, but obviously Zach Crothers with those 14 sacks, he leads that front seven group for the Lions. This team is just going to be locked in, dialed in, laser focused, whatever you want to throw it to. Damian Jones, I'm sure, is going to have those boys ready from Broward to come up and play their best game of the season, because really all these games through the playoffs for them have just been a warm-up. Because they haven't Cardinal Newman was probably their toughest challenge, and I would say that just because they were able to score.
I agree with you, and they just ran right by them.
Yep, they beat them by 30-plus points. Cardinal Newman was able to score against them, so unlike the other two playoff games, they weren't shut out. So this will mean for Chaminade, this will be their toughest test. And it should be. It's the state championship game, and for CCC likewise. But it's your proverbial David versus Goliath type matchup, and it's so hard to say that because this is a Chris Harvey team. They're going to be well coached. He's a former University of Miami player. He's going to have his guys ready. He's very vocal on social media. I saw he put something in regards to, if more of my guys are not on the radar for university, something's wrong, because he does have a lot of talented players. It's not just a one-sided. He doesn't have any dudes. He's got guys that can definitely play at the next level. It's just he's going to be playing up against a Lions group that they got a lot of those guys.
No, absolutely, Andy. And, of course, the Class 1M State Championship is Thursday night, 7 o'clock kickoff at Gene Cox Stadium, and that'll be a big game right there. And, Andy, let's get into the next one, which Friday night, 2S. We're going to go into the 2S game, the 2S State Championship, which will be 7 o'clock Friday night at Gene Cox Stadium, and that is the matchup between Cocoa and the hometown team, the Florida High Seminoles, just 10 minutes up the road from Gene Cox Stadium there with Florida High. And Andy, this is going to be an interesting one. Because Florida High was a state semifinalist last year, got knocked out by Chaminade in the state semifinals, and then Cocoa, who played Cardinal Gibbons in a very competitive state championship in the 4A title game last year. So, and again, for Florida High, this is their first trip back to the state championship game since the 2019 3A title game. Who they lost to? Who did they lose to that year? Chaminade. So, I think there's kind of a story and a circle here between these teams here. But this 2S matchup is actually going to be very, very competitive, looking at the way both teams have played this year, and that Florida High, who they played Trinity Catholic in week 1. Again, Trinity Catholic playing for state championship this weekend. So this one's going to be really interesting, I think.
Yeah, Florida State High. They're heading into the undefeated. They're the home team. Their defense has been one of the best in northern Florida, the Big Bend area. Obviously, they're going to have the crowd behind them. They got everything to play for. Then they're up against this, obviously, a Cocoa team that is no strangers to this at this round of the postseason, being in the state championship game. Coach Snyder has this group dialed in. You saw them against Bradford in the state semis. Blake Boda at quarterback has been one of the top signal callers there, not just on the East Coast, but I mean, heck, we got to say the state of Florida, right? I mean,
no, absolutely, I agree with you on that one. I mean, in the entire state of Florida, Blake Boda, I mean, and we'll talk about that in a moment, just what Blake Boda can do, because with what I saw Friday night against Bradford, he has a favorite target, so we have to talk about that too, but. This whole matchup just really speaks. It should be in my mind, it's going to be a big crowd because fans from Cocoa are going to be there, but Florida High, Tallahassee is going to be there. So again, this is going to be a great matchup for fans to watch if you're really into high school football.
Oh yeah, and Florida High. I mean, the wins on the schedule. I know you may have it on a graphic already, but they are battle tested like none other. I mean, the 14 wins, they got one over Trinity Catholic. We already mentioned them. They're going to be in the Class 1S State Championship game against Naples First Baptist. They beat Madison County. Obviously, a little bit of a down year for the Cowboys, but always good. Monroe is a playoff team. Chiefland, Lincoln, South Walton, Pensacola Catholics, and then you get into the postseason, Suwanee, Bishop Verot. I mean, this Seminoles team really comes into this state championship game hot. Really, a lot of good wins along the way through the 14. And Coach Hickman, I mean, he's really done a nice job with this Seminoles team throughout the season. Coach Snyder and the Tigers, they're gonna give the Seminoles everything they want with that offense. I haven't got. These are two teams I didn't get to see during the regular season. But hearing about Cocoa and Florida State High, just knowing that both teams have played really well throughout the season. Cocoa, it's the offense. It's this offense, Josh. I can't wait to talk about it just because knowing you got to see him in person and hearing about him from colleague Jeff Gardenauer, he's spoken really highly about him, especially that win over South Sumter in the playoffs. That was a very impressive win by the Tigers. I mean, this is a really good matchup. If we're talking one of the better matchups of the state championships of the 9, this is up there, Josh.
This is up there on your screen. The profiles for each team right there. You look at it and you see, look at the road to state in the playoffs. I mean, you look at it for Florida High right here. South Fulton 63-44. Pensacola Catholic gave them a scare. 18-14 win over the Pensacola Catholic Crusaders there. Suwanee 38-13 win, and they got the win over Bishop Verot here. So and the big thing here. But look at what Cocoa did on the other side of this. Just rolled through Dunellen, rolled through Palm Bay, rolled through South Sumter before Bradford showed up against them and kind of made a thing. It was a 14-0 halftime lead for Cocoa, but two scores real quick in the third quarter on a kickoff return and a block punt return for a touchdown. Made it real quick, a ball game there in Stark, and Andy, that one really, to me, just really kind of set the tone about, okay, hey, maybe people underestimated the capabilities of Bradford a little bit, even myself, but I mean, I know that Bradford had a really good club, but I just when you start to look at it, it's like, if certain things have been factored in with the FHA power ranking, especially on margin of victory, I think that game would have most likely been at Cocoa, not Stark. Based upon okay, Cocoa has played a tougher strength of schedule, which I think that's a bigger thing to mention here is Cocoa. Looking at the thing for Cocoa is that they've had 3 losses this year, so they're coming into this, with in the fact of that, they had a loss to Jones, they had a loss to St. Thomas Aquinas, I mean, and then you look at that and that the big the games they lost to are teams that made the playoffs, teams that made deep runs. A team, especially like St. Thomas Aquinas, who's playing for a state championship next week. So, for Cocoa, it's they're battle tested, and Ryan Schneider, he's no stranger to this. I mean, it might be his 5th year at Coco, but for at the same time for him, it's hey, he coached at St. Thomas Aquinas before coming to Coco, so this is no strange place for him.
No, not at all. And the 3 losses, if you know anything about this season and wins and losses and the tough teams, these 3 teams they lost to are as good as anyone when fully healthy. And I say that because of Sanford Seminole not having Luke Rucker at quarterback. I felt like that was kind of why they ended up bouncing out kind of early. But Jones, I mean, obviously made a deep run. St. Thomas Aquinas will be playing for a state championship, and then Sanford Seminole. They have their quarterback. I think they would be playing for a state title. Their team was that good. So the 3 losses are nothing to really kind of snub. And they're the road to the state title game. Obviously, Rockledge was a good win for them. Dunellen, they in the region quarterfinal, they just manhandled Palm Bay, South Sumter, Bradford. I mean, yeah, strength of schedule definitely plays a part in this. But, I mean, I got to say that Florida State High, they've played a pretty good schedule themselves. And I know you just had the graphic up, but and we mentioned them. I mean, they've played a lot of playoff teams, and that's something that obviously before they started their playoff run, but they played a lot of good teams before they started against South Walton. So I think you got 2 teams that are going to come into this with a lot of momentum. And I mean, it's a great offense against a team they're the home team. They're the team that everyone's going to be cheering for, right?
No, absolutely. That's going to be, and then expect a decent, big crowd there. Hopefully a sellout crowd there at Gene Cox. I'd say it's about 7,000 people there in that game, and of course the Class 2S State Championship game, 7:00 Friday night, Gene Cox Stadium, right there in Tallahassee. And of course, on the bottom of your screen, there's the ticker that shows you all the information, what the matchups are, and hey, if you want, you want to buy tickets or watch the game, that information's there for you. So, there's no questions asked as to how you can watch the game or even how to buy tickets. So, and of course, again, 2S State Championship game, Friday night, 7:00 kickoff at Gene Cox Stadium here. And Andy, before we get into the next classification, we do need to go over the stat leaders here real quick, because we talked about Blake Boda with Coco. Almost 3,800 yards passing through all the games played up until through last week. And I mean, that, 47 touchdowns. I mean, that is it's a gaudy number when you start to think about what Blake Boda has been able to do this year. 248 of 379 passing. That's just those stats are just unheard of usually, and that, like, in terms of a quarterback throwing for that much. You usually get a 2,500, 3,000 yard guy, but it depending on how the game goes Friday night, Blake Boda might have 4,000 yards passing. That's a thought that we usually we don't hear. 4,000 yards passing in a season. That's crazy to think. But on the other side, there's Florida High's quarterback Jeremy Johnston, 2,400 yards so far this season, 23 touchdowns. But Andy, Blake Boda, I mean, this kid just literally has been on fire.
Yeah, I mean, he started off the season on fire. When you're talking about yardage, that's what a volume guy with the yards, because you look at the amount of games that he was able to throw for over 300 yards. I mean, it was for a better part of the season. I'm just taking a look at it, and it looks like 8 or 9 of the games, and they played 13. So, I mean, 9 out of those 13 games, he threw for over 300 yards. His high is 375 against Jones this season. And, I mean, if you've seen Jones, they got a good defense. Don't hold it against them with the Homestead loss. The Broncos are good. Boda's just been able to really air it out. I'd say his most impressive performance of the season was that game over in Bushnell against South Sumter, an undefeated Raiders team. They win 35-7. He goes 25 of 38 for 368 yards, 5 touchdowns, and the number that is most important, that offensive coordinator, 20, no turnovers. no interception.
I mean, that's just. I mean, it's a crazy number to think about, and and one thing I want to bring up here, Andy, as we talk about this with the stats, I want to look at go back to the numbers real quick from last week, because I'll tell you what. Let's go to the receiving numbers here real quick on this one. The stat leader for Coco is Javon Boggs, 39 receptions, 702 yards, 6 touchdowns. Boda was picking on the Bradford defense with Boggs Friday night, so I mean, this is this just to give that thought of hey, if they see Coco sees something in the Florida High defense, they may pick on them with Boggs. They may pick them use Boggs again and pick on the Florida High defense that way.
Yeah, I mean, you throw for nearly 4,000 yards as an offense, and the numbers that they put up against the kind of opponents they've been playing. I gotta imagine they're gonna. It's not completely shutting it down. You're not going. Coach Hickman's not going into this game like we're gonna make sure he throws for 100 yards and he's gonna have all these picks. It's kind of like how do we slow him down? How do we kind of minimize amount of times he gets explosives in terms of big plays and be able to get touchdowns? Maybe we can hold him to a couple hundred and. Maybe a touchdown. But I got to think that Boda on the biggest stage for him and the Tigers, he's going to show up like he has all season. He's a gamer. He's played really well this season.
No, absolutely. And Andy, to talk about this one real quick, Blake Boda, 19 to 25 last week, 328 yards, a 76% completion percentage. That's just. I mean, you almost want to think that's kind of Madden numbers there in a way. Just hey, or I'm gonna be a great quarterback and I'm playing Madden here. So that's what it looks like here. But looking at some of the other numbers here in the stats for the stats department for between the two teams, rushing. I mean, Coco's. They kind of balance it out in terms of who they give the ball off to in the run game because they rely on Boda so much to throw the ball downfield. So Anthony Bridgewater, stat leader, 614 yards, 5 touchdowns rushing. But Florida High, they tend to balance things off a little bit more there at Florida High, and Micaiah Danzy, 1,500 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns, and then Brooks Hickman, 61 catches, 864 yards, 7 touchdowns. Brooks Hickman is the son of Jared Hickman, who is the head coach there at Florida High. But just looking at it, each team, number of tackles balanced out a little bit. I mean, the number of sacks, they're sack leaders. There's really not, there's not too much difference there between that and even interceptions. It's like, so it seems like the defenses are both kind of similar in a way, but it's the offenses that are very like night and day here when we talk about these two teams.
Yeah, one is pass heavy, Seminoles more balanced. Obviously with Johnson, he's going to orchestrate this offense, and he had one of his best games against Bishop Verot in that state semifinal win. He threw for nearly 300 yards. Talk about efficiency, 15 of 18, 83% of his passes completed, only a touchdown. He did throw an interception, but hard for the Vikings last week, so he's going to have to bring even a better game to the table this time around, I believe. Obviously, he's got Danzy on the ground who's going to be able to churn out some yards for him, but I think it's a quarterback-eccentric matchup. It's kind of like the one we just talked about with CCC and Chaminade, and that's kind of how football is it's kind of trending, right? I mean, it's a lot more of a quarter-oriented game. It's not like 15, 20 years ago. Heck, when I played, if you could throw the ball 15 times effectively, it was that was a big-time passing game. That was a lot of passes thrown. The wing tee was hot, and now if you see someone run the wing tee, you're like, what year are we in? Because down 7 is so popular because everything's revolving the quarterbacks. It's what can these quarterbacks and receivers do for you, offensive coordinators? It's
absolutely.
Back,
it's the air raid offenses. It's the air raids. It's the West Coast offenses now.
Exactly. So another game with two good signal callers. Obviously, some more balance on the ground. They got a 1,500 yard rusher in D. So I mean, one of the better matchups though, Josh. Definitely, I think of the 9, it's up there. It's top 5 for sure.
It's up there for sure, but I know some of the top ones will be next week because those will be really interesting, especially the one in that 2M matchup. But we'll get to that next week when we deal with those 5 games for Fort Lauderdale. But getting into the 1S State Championship preview here coming up, that'll be a 1 o'clock kickoff at Gene Cox Stadium on Saturday. And this one's interesting. Trinity Catholic has not played in a state championship game in over a decade, 12 years since they last played. 2010 when they won the Class 2B title in triple overtime against University School and a coach that was rising up in the name of Roger Harriet, who is now at St. Thomas Aquinas and leading them to a state championship game once again this year. But let's talk about the 2 teams here that we got. Trinity Catholic, and then we got First Baptist, who, four times the charm for Naples First Baptist, finally getting to the state championship game. Got knocked out last year in the 2A bracket in the state semifinals by Champagnat Catholic. So first title appearance game for First Baptist here. And Billy Sparacio, who is in his 14th year, built that program up from scratch starting in 2009, and now here 14 years later, finally getting their team into the state championship game. And they go up against the Trinity Catholic team, who is led by head coach John Brantley III, who is in his 9th year overall between 2 stints. This is his 3rd year in his 2nd stint there at Trinity Catholic. And really interesting is that both teams come in with 9-2 record. They've had both teams got affected with games being wiped off the schedule due to Hurricane Ian and during the regular season. So really, really interesting. Two different teams here, but in the small schools of 1S and as private schools here go, in terms of in the suburban areas, Trinity Catholic, I thought, the entire year when coming into the preseason, Andy, I thought Trinity Catholic was one of the teams that was going to make the state championship game. It was who else was going to come out of it. First Baptist was in the mix. We talked, people talked about Lakeland Christian. John Carroll was in that mix too. Some people thought maybe if Victory Christian was improving, they could make a statement. So here we are. Even North Florida Christian was in the mix until Monroe Day stopped them right there in the regional finals. So, this state championship game is very interesting because, at the end of the day, I think, either team could really win this one because it's just the way, each one's got, some quality players, but, we don't hear about them as much because, again, they're 1S teams and they're small school football.
Yeah, I'd say it's another one of those state title matchups that pretty even on paper. Obviously, the records match, so that it speaks to that. 9-2, 2 very well coached teams with Coach Billy Sparacio and then Coach Brantley. So both teams going to head in. It's been obviously first time for First Baptist, and then it's been a decade for Trinity Catholic. And I go to the road to prosperity here for them. Just the teams they had to go through, and Trinity Catholic, look at that win that they had against Clearwater Central Catholic, and I really feel like that is one of the more impressive wins during the season. They did beat another Clearwater team in Calvary Christian and a absolute shootout, 49-46, and the Warriors were really good team in 2M there. They ended up losing to Lakewood in another offensive shootout. And then in the playoffs, Father Lopez, PK Young, John Carroll, they're able to run the table and get to this point. And you go over to First Baptist, and the wins against Bishop Verot and Frostproof, I look at those. The Frostproof game, they won very comfortably, 41-0. The Bulldogs, obviously, they're going through a change now, Josh. They were one of those teams, knowing your moving van there, they're going to be looking for a new head coach. But good win for First Baptist there. And then Bishop Verot, a team that was state semifinalists, able to defeat them during the season. And then that I see Cardinal Mooney. I think that's an underrated win for them. It was an overtime victory for First Baptist, and
yeah,
to these 3 games is really being the ones that kind of were the telling signs that this team could get to the state championship. Because obviously, on our I guess if we had any kind of preseason write-in who's going to be in the 1S state championship game. Love to see who had First Baptist in it, right? I don't think there'd be a lot of takers on that would say, "Yep, I had them written in right there."
No, absolutely, and they were right there in that mix, Andy. And of course, when talking about the state championship games, the thing, and I think that was a general consensus this year is when you started looking at this, that every classification had their group of teams that could have been in the mix for a state championship. Some classifications had a little bit more on their list, but some maybe a few a little bit shorter list, but it was hard to peg saying, hey, okay, this team's going to win this title game. This team's going to, like we've been doing for years, where it's like, oh, well, all right, well, it's going to be another South Florida run this year. We're not saying that's the case because, hey, well, when we start looking at it, well, it's only South Florida can win at most is 4 of the state championships in the Metro classification. So when we look at that, we look at 1S and we're like, oh, wow, you thing is like, who would have had Monroe Day going to the state semifinals? I sure did not. So, I mean, if that tells you anything, the mix of teams that were sitting there, in the regional finals and sitting there and going to the state semifinals, it was definitely it was definitely refreshing in a way because we were like, oh, wait a second, hey, I didn't expect this team so and so to do this well this year. I didn't expect like a North Florida Christian to go 10-0 this year in the regular season. So that tells you that hey, maybe this Metro Suburban thing does have a valid point. But back to what we're talking about here with this game, looking at these teams here and for the 1S game, I think if you look at the path these two teams had to go through the playoffs, I mean, it seems like, it's first round, their states, their regional semifinal wins fairly easy, the way the seeding was done, Trinity Catholic had PK Young in the regional final. No issue there, but Moorhaven kind of gave First Baptist a little bit of a game there, and that's interesting to say that because First Baptist, with Moorhaven was a team that was struggling just as of last year. Team didn't play a full schedule, got a new head coach, and all of a sudden here Moorhaven went to the regional final this year. So I think in all this, if you look at it, Moorhaven may have been the biggest test that First Baptist had here so far until what they're going to get here come 1:00 Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, and Moorhaven they had a terrific season, bouncing back from last year. They're kind of, dare I say, a team from area I'm in. They kind of have a Pasco type revival. Didn't do much last year, but then out of nowhere, kind of turned things around real quickly. So nice job over at Moorhaven. But yeah, I mean, First Baptist, just the road. I'm going to use the road to prosperity. I'll be saying that a lot, Josh, is just the road getting to the state championship. And I see you got the stats there. I was gonna say we definitely touch on those here, but good wins along the way. Moorhaven did give them some problems there, but able to come away with the win. Able to handle Monroe Day. Jaden Booker, someone we're going to talk about here in just a minute, had a big game, over 200 yards rushing in that win over Monroe. So, yeah, I mean, big. It was definitely a solid slate of games for them along the way.
No, absolutely. Let's talk about those stats now that I've got it. That thing had a little slight blip there with your audio, Andy, when I went to go to the stats, but now I got that fixed and it's the thing. But let's talk about these stats here because what's really interesting is when we start to talk about the big guy that we, even though he's more of a defensive player this year, but he's a really kind of an all-around player for First Baptist is Rich Millian, who really is kind of like this guy. He's been there all 4 years, played varsity all 4 years for First Baptist. So, he's got 2 INTs. He's tied to this, the interception leader. But when we go back up and look at the stats on offense, you mentioned Jaden Booker there, Andy, and he's got just over 1,100 yards this year. But again, they've only played 11 games, so these stats, they say, oh, these stats look low for both teams when you start looking at both teams for Trinity Catholic and First Baptist. But we got to remind people they've just played 11 games, and this is now going into. This would be the 14th game for them if they had played a full schedule. So 11 games, they each team didn't have a complete full schedule in the season that they got to play again because the hurricane affected some things. So these numbers probably reflect better in terms of 11 game schedule versus 13 games being played so far.
Oh yeah, I mean they're reading off the previous four teams for this 1S state title game. I mean those teams had extra games on their schedule. They were able to play more of a full slate, and you also got to take with the lower classification that there's one less if you're
Right.
at your higher seed, so you're not going to be able to kind of, I don't want to say inflate the stats, but kind of add to it, add to the repertoire compared to the other teams. So, but yeah, I mean, nonetheless, both teams have some impressive statistics. The quarterback play has been solid for each team. Preston Wright, he's been a good player for the Celtics this year. I had him as a nomination for Athlete of the Week a couple times this past season, so he's had some good performances. Across from him, Ethan Crossan, he's had a very nice season for First Baptist, and what I see with First Baptist is a much more balanced offense. They can kind of do it either way. They can be able to hurt you with the pass, or they can go ground and pound and really just kind of run the rock at you. So, and Trinity Catholic likewise with Bo Beard at running back, nearly 1,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, and both teams, I don't want to say, completely identical, but they, heck, go down to even their sacks, Josh. The Celtics lead men, Jeremiah Rem, 5.5, and then go to First Baptist, Donovan Seeley with 5 sacks. I mean, these guys are down to the record, to the stats.
They're pretty even, Andy. They're pretty. They're like an even team here in a lot of ways. So it's like it's flip a coin as to who's going to win, and you might be right.
like step brothers here, just kind of okay, they're like the same almost. So yeah, these guys are. I don't want to say mirror images, but they're pretty close when you look at the stat sheet. If you put it right in front of you and didn't list anything about the team name, you could almost say vice versa. It could be either one really. So it's shaping up to be a good one as final there on Saturday.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, indeed. And, of course, the 1S State Championship game, 1 p.m. kickoff at Gene Cox Stadium on Saturday there in Tallahassee. And, of course, we get the doubleheader on Saturday with 2 games. And that we go into the Class 1R State Championship preview, Andy. And, this is going to be interesting. Hawthorne, who has been now going to their 3rd straight state championship game, lost the last 2 games in their first 2 appearances in a state championship game. But now here comes the Hornets playing a team that has won a state title in the world classification, but it's been a decade since they won that title, and that is the Northview Chiefs here. And 3rd-year head coach Wes Summerford, and of course Cornelius Ingram in his 8th year there at Hawthorne. And of course Cornelius Ingram is a Hawthorne legend, Hawthorne alum, played for the Florida Gators, and now he's got his team there sitting there playing for a 3rd state title game. And Andy, I think if you look at this, I mean, I think when we look at the stats, I think this game it'll be competitive because it's rural football. But I think at the end of the day, when we start to look at some of the stats, not so much maybe the offensive side for Hawthorne, because Northview's offensive numbers are really out of this world here when you start to look at some of the numbers, but I think it's Hawthorne's defense is going to be the key thing here, and I think that when we talk about that, but I mean, for both of these teams, Hawthorne 3rd state championship game in 3 years, Northview the first time since 2012. I mean, it's really interesting how these paths for these teams in the playoffs have been, whereas Holmes County, threw up a test in the regional semifinal for them. Wildwood tried to give them a test there in the regional semifinal until they came around, and then Pahokee almost about put Hawthorne out of the playoffs here for that. But then looking at it, rolled through Blountstown, but of course Northview rolled through Chipley in the regional final, and Union County kind of gave them a little bit of a test there. So I mean, this is going to be small town football at its finest on Saturday night at Gene Cox Stadium, and I actually think for these 2 teams, you will have a very decent sized crowd. This is not like Madison County versus Hawthorne or Madison County versus whoever in the World Championship, but this will still draw out a good crowd of fans on Saturday night for rural football there in Tallahassee.
Yeah, absolutely. And both teams come in undefeated, and they both have some common opponents between them. Blountstown obviously one, and Union County the other. They I mean, they were able to really just both teams kind of different from one another. Hawthorne, more of a defensive football team, kind of want to grind you. Obviously, last year in the state championship against Madison County, losing 13-12, still has to sting, still has to be in the back of the minds of the Hornets players, staff, and obviously Coach Cornelius Ingram is going to probably remind them of that, even though I'm sure that is always it's not about the past, about the present and the future, but I'm sure that's got to be somewhere in the pep talk that, hey, we're not going to let this one go. We're not going to let one slip up. They're going to face a Northview team that you just mentioned it, stat fillers. I mean, they got some guys with some really strong numbers. We'll talk about Mr. Jefferson here in a little bit, but yeah, I mean, one of the top running backs in terms of statistics in the state of Florida, and also plays baseball. I mean, both teams really just impressive all season long within 1R, and outside of it as well. You look at Hawthorne, they played some of the higher, upper classification teams. North Marion, that was a game I was thinking about going to, Josh, and they won 13-0 against Greg Carr in that group. They beat Wildwood in the playoffs, Union County during the season, Orlando Christian Prep in overtime, 14-11. That was a really good game. Northview, obviously, based on the region and everything, and people got to remember, Bratt, Florida is, heck, it's a short drive to Alabama from there. So
they can throw a stone over the state line.
Yeah, it's right there. So not getting a lot of take that want to drive over to Northview unless if you're over in that Panhandle area. And definitely got to see a little bit of the Panhandle and going to see that South Walton Rutherford game during Hurricane Ian when it was down in the Southwest Florida region and going into Central Florida. But Josh, I mean, this was a game. I had 3 intriguing matchups. Some of them are going to be next week, I believe. This was the third one, and I believe for all the right reasons, just because our rural football is great. I got to see a Chiefland Wildwood game during the season. I mean, small town football, you gotta love it. You really gotta love it. It's almost football. I don't want to say at its most primitive form, but it's football at its purest form of the fans really love it. There's social media a part of it, getting the hype, but it's not as much as these metro areas and suburban. It's kind of more word of mouth around the town, and they're like, hey, games on Friday. And you're like, all right, be there. So it's enjoyable. So looking forward to a good matchup on Saturday night.
No, absolutely. Of course, and looking at it, you mentioned about some of these games here, that Hawthorne has played, and the thing, and it would be a failure on my part not to mention that, Hawthorne at one point was down 21-0 in Union County and came back and won 28-21 during the regular season. Again, they were down 15-6 to Wildwood in the playoffs and won 15-6, and they won 33-15. So Hawthorne, I think is it can be a beatable team. It's just can you play the cards right? But again, we're going to talk about some stats here, I think makes it interesting I think leans more towards Hawthorne winning the first state championship in school history, just because when we talk about that here in a moment, Andy, and let's again, looking at this, it's small town football. Let's bring up the stats here in all this, and looking at this, Andy, with the stats here, I mean, you mentioned about Jamarcus Jefferson here. I mean, his numbers are just, it's wild crazy. 2,300 yards, 271 carries, 43 touchdowns. That's where Northview puts the ball out. But, for a lot of teams that try to rush the ball against Hawthorne, it really is tough because Hawthorne, the Hawthorne's defense may start slow in a game, but once they wake up and get all the cylinders going, all 8 cylinders in that V8 of the engine that they have of a defense, it's hard to run the ball, and if you try to throw the ball against them, you might be in trouble there too. So let me, I mean, just looking at the numbers here, the defense side of things explains a lot right there for them.
Yeah, and I expect Caden Odom to be somebody that's really got to be an X factor for Northview at the quarterback position. He's thrown for nearly 1,400 yards. He's got 15 touchdowns. He can also run the ball. Got nearly 600 yards. He's got to take a little bit off of Jefferson because obviously he's the bell cow. He's the workhorse. He's the whatever you want to call him at the running back position. He's that guy. He is going to be the one they call upon. And Josh, not only do they give him about 35 to 40 carries, but they tell him, come on back, get you a water, and then you're going to play some defense too. 67 tackles. You got 7 sacks there. He's got to do it all. He literally has to because no one else is him. And if there's time where Josh, I got to believe that Coach Summerford is making sure he's got all the fluids, all the body armor, Gatorades, power,
even pickle juice, even pickle juice.
Yeah, pickle juice. It's like, hey, make sure you can play every snap because we're gonna need you to. And yeah, I mean, he's been a story over in that, not just for Northview, just Panhandle and really all of Florida. He's been tremendous. And Hawthorne, that defense, like you said, Tariq Robinson leads with the 95 tackles. Jalen Ruth, just a stud defensive end, 18 sacks, Power 5 type player. I mean, that defense, like you said, is something serious. And
I saw Hawthorne against that game against Wildwood, and Jalen Roof, I mean, the defense wasn't as much of a factor in the first half, but the second half they came out rolling. Who was the name that the name was getting called? Jalen Roof. Jalen Roof has been he's been a force for the Hawthorne defense here the last couple of years, and I mean, sure enough, 18 sacks, and the big thing is again, I think the biggest question is how much do you hand it off to Jamarcus Jefferson for Northview, because you got Jalen Roof leading that defensive line that's very nasty for the Hornets. So how do you keep because if your offensive line is not being able to open up the holes, Andy, in here and all that, if they're not able to open up the holes, that's going to be trouble for Jamarcus Jefferson, which means then you got to go rely on Odom to be able to throw the ball. And if if you go back and look at it here, I'll go back on the stats here real quick here. You look at it, Darian Smith-Williams, 5 interceptions for Hawthorne. Hawthorne, they know how to pick the ball off. So that's a big thing right there. For Northview is that, okay, which way do you roll the dice here in terms of being able to potentially get this, get a win over Hawthorne, who has been here now for the third year straight.
Yeah, they're going to find a way to slow down the pass rush somehow, and I don't know if running the ball is exactly going to be that. I think they're going to have to throw some screens. They're going to have to get that short game going with the pass, kind of make sure to keep them honest. Keep them honest. If they stack the box, it's going to cause problems for Jefferson in the run game. Got to be able to alleviate that front seven and kind of get more guys out in pass coverage. Make them think that, hey, we want to get vertical with you guys. And, if that happens and they play more 6, 7 guys in the box traditionally, I mean, they may be some yards on the ground, but if they're able to stack that box, Josh, it's going to be a long night for Northview being able to get anything going offensively.
No, absolutely. And of course, the Class 1R State Championship will be 7 o'clock on Saturday night at Gene Cox Stadium. That'll be the nightcap to put the bow on the first week of state championships there in Tallahassee. And of course, then we'll turn around, wash, rinse, repeat, get ready to go to Fort Lauderdale the week after that, Andy. And we'll talk about those next week. But I mean, Andy, I definitely appreciate you being able to take some time here to talk these state championship games. I mean, there's going to be a lot of fun. Both me and you will be there at all 4 games here this weekend, and of course next weekend in Fort Lauderdale as well. But again, it's going to be a lot of fun for very interesting matchups against for 8 teams that are coming to Tallahassee to play, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun here this weekend at Gene Cox Stadium.
Absolutely. You got 4 great matchups. Definitely a lot of intriguing on the field matchups when you're talking about offense, defense, and individuals. So And you can't forget the head coaches. A lot of great minds that are going to be on the sideline trying to not play chess, not checkers. So they're going to be trying to nab either their first state championship or add another trophy to the hardware set. So definitely excited to get to Gene Cox Stadium. Never have been there, so looking forward to seeing the stadium. And hey, like Gene Dickerhoff says, the former Florida State play caller there, can't wait for toe to hit leather.
No, exactly. Toe will meet leather here starting Thursday night between the Class 1 and State Championship between Clearwater Central Catholic and Shamma Madonna. Of course, then the 2S State Championship game Friday night between Cocoa and Florida High. And then Saturday, we have a doubleheader with the 1S State Championship game between Trinity Catholic and First Baptist at 1 p.m. And then 7 p.m., the Class 1R game between Northview and Hawthorne. And that'll do it for our preview here. Andy, thanks again, and I'll see you in Tallahassee this weekend.
All right. Thank you, Josh, for having me on, and I will see you in the 850.
Yep, they're in the 850. Appreciate it. That was Andy Villamarzo joining us here from SBLive Florida. We appreciate him joining us here, and we'll definitely see everybody here again. Appreciate Andy joining us here from SBLive Florida and SBLive Sports for helping be a part of this and being able to talk about all the state championship games this week, and of course we'll do it again next week. And for everybody here at FloydHSFootball.com, appreciate it, and we'll see you next time here on FloydHSFootball.com and our videos here across our social media platforms. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.